All right, well, one of the things we might be thinking is that we've been focusing a lot on early life development when we've been talking about socialization. So it might be a mistaken belief that we socialize until a certain period in our lives and then that process is completed. That's incorrect. As we all know, that we go through life changing and changing and changing and developing, and that those changes and literally adaptations to our social environment continue on throughout our entire lives. So while we've definitely focused on the importance of early socialization, that certainly is not to say by any means that at some point in time we are quote-unquote done as people, as social creatures. So to address that issue, we come to the topic of resocialization. So we recognize that while we do become socialized at the earlier parts of our lives, that as we go through our experience in society, that there will be changes to our social environment, and when we match or adapt to those changes in our social environment, we're engaging in the process of resocialization. That is, learning new values. Values change throughout our lives, learning new norms, again, rules that support those values, adapting to new changes by taking on new behaviors and exhibiting new types of behaviors. So, if we want to think about this process of resocialization, and we realize that not all the changes in our environment are exactly the same or the same have the same impact on us, we can kind of think about resocialization as occurring on a continuum. So we can talk about the idea that some types of resocialization, again, are very mild in nature, all the way up to very extreme. And typically when we kind of gauge these resocializations, we can think about how much of our total lifestyle changes because of these resocializations. So a couple of examples. Again, we'll start down here on kind of the mild edge of the spectrum. Let's say you've been working at a job for a number of years, and within a short period of time, you get a new boss, a new supervisor. And that new boss or supervisor comes in, and whether or not it's an office workplace or a thing like a hospital or a school or any type of work environment, the new boss or supervisor comes in and he or she says, I'm not satisfied with the procedures that are in place or the way we do things or our operating system, if it's a technology issue or something like that, and says, I'm going to change everything we do. I'm going to replace the computers, I'm going to buy new software, I'm going to institutionalize or institute a bunch of new policies, any of those kind of things. And you might think to yourself, wow, that's going to be a real pain in my butt, and everything's going to change. But when you think about it in the scope of our entire lives, we would probably classify that resocialization as being rather mild. Okay? Yes, your work environment's going to change, and it may take you learning some new procedures and, like I said, you exhibiting new behaviors in order to adapt to that change in your social environment. But when you look at your overall lifestyle, most of the rest of your life is probably going to remain pretty much the same. You're still going to live in the same environment you live in. Your family situation isn't going to change. You're still going to drive home the same way. You're still going to shop at the same places that you shop at. You're still going to have the same friends. You're still going to recreate in the same ways that you always have. So it can certainly seem, like I said, kind of a pain in the butt that your boss is changing all these things around. But in the overall scope of things, the resocialization is required in that situation is rather mild. Okay? Again, certainly we could talk about more moderate resocialization. And again, there's all sorts of different degrees to which this is. If I said to you, okay, you're going to change homes, you're going to move from one side of town to the other side of town. Well, you could probably put that in a bit of a, maybe somewhere along this line. Okay, obviously things are going to change in your life. You may change the places that you shop. You may change some of the places that you visit, like I said, for recreation, bars, restaurants, theaters, that kind of stuff. But once again, you probably could look at the parts of your life that won't change, your immediate family, probably again, some of your closest friends will stay the same. However, now if I were to say, okay, you're going to move from New York City to Los Angeles. Okay, now we're talking about probably much more required resocialization. Okay, chances are if you're making that move, you're probably also changing jobs. So let's just assume you're moving from one job position to another, and that required you to relocate to a different city. Obviously, the job change plus the entire change in your living situation, a new home, new neighborhood, new city. You probably, if you were or were not, if you're moving with your family, again, probably not so much of a change there. However, you probably need to set up a new social circle of friends. So, you know, change the places that you go, all those other kind of things. So it would just require much more adaptation on your part. Again, that's physical relocation, but there's certainly all sorts of other types of examples. When we get into this kind of more moderate range, certainly we could talk about the idea of getting married. Okay, so many of you, if you're not already married at some time in your future, you may become married, and getting married certainly we would say requires a big change in lifestyle, where you and your partner, you know, like I said, may change circles of friends, or your behavior on a daily basis changes. The flip side of that coin is if you were married and become divorced, that's certainly going to change a lot of your daily activity and behavior. Changes again in circles of friends, lifestyles, moving to a situation of being single after being married. Certainly if we talk about situations where kids are involved, having shared custody. Okay, all these are the kind of adaptations that people need to make on a regular basis, and it's how much they affect our daily routine, daily, weekly, monthly routine, can help us kind of conceptualize how much resocialization needs to occur. When we get down into kind of the most severe or extreme types of resocialization, now we're talking about changes in people's social environment which are almost complete or total. Okay? In fact, the term we use for this a lot of times is the idea of the total institution. Again, an institution meaning a large organization, okay, which kind of controls people's behavior, or certainly has a high influence on people's behavior. When we talk about the idea of the total institution, we're talking about the most extreme types of resocialization that human beings sometimes need to undergo. There's, you know, just generally we talk about this idea that it's almost, in a sense, kind of being cut off from society as a whole, and having to change your lifestyle or your values and behaviors so dramatically that they have very little resemblance to the ones that occurred before that. There are two great examples of the total institution, and while they're very similar in nature, sometimes what we consider the motivations or the reasons that people undergo these total institutions are very different. Okay, the first example we a lot of times use is prison. Okay, going to prison. Certainly, going to prison is an example of a very extreme form of resocializing. Okay, very little about a person's quote-unquote normal lifestyle exists when a person enters a total institution like becoming incarcerated. So I sometimes, again, challenge students with that idea. Think about your first day in prison. Yeah, you show up, they take away all your belongings, you're given a set of clothing that you are required to wear that makes you look like everybody else. You're very unlikely to be known by names or nicknames that you prefer. Okay, the institution will now present you with a new identity, again, whether or not it's a number or being referred to solely by your last name, or again, sometimes the institution will actually give you names or labels that you might not agree on completely. But then you think about the daily routine. You wake up at a specific time that you are told to. Your daily activities are highly regulated and given to you. Your jobs, your education, even your recreation activities. You're told to eat, when to sleep, when to shower, when to recreate, what type of activities you're allowed to do while you're recreating. You're certainly not allowed to do anything that you want to. You have to follow strict standards of behavior up until the time, like I said, you're told when to go to sleep, and then the next next day starts, and again, it's a highly regimented situation. So prison clearly is a pretty extreme form of re-socializing, something that requires major changes in your values and behavior. The second example is the military. Okay, think about what it's like going into the military. And again, I sometimes then what's down and go, what's going to happen the first day you show up for military indoctrination or boot camp? You're going to have all your possessions taken away from you. You're going to be given a set of clothing that makes you look like everybody else. You're not going to be referred to by the name or identity that you've constructed for yourself. You're going to be given a new one. Your daily routine, highly structured. You're going to be told when to get up. You're going to be told when to eat. You're going to be told what activities you're going to be participating in. You're going to be told how and when you can recreate. You're not going to be able to engage in the type of activities that you might normally engage in up until the time you're told when to go to sleep at night. So we can clearly look at these two examples, the military and prison, as being very different in a lot of the ways, especially when we talk about, again, how people arrive at those positions and the ways that society regards them. Typically we regard military service as positive and we regard prison as negative, but they are very, very, very similar in the idea when we look at them as a form of re-socialization, especially in light of this, this concept of the total institution. It's an attempt by the institution to take away the identity you've built for yourself and replace it with an identity that is desired by the institution. Again, we largely think of prison as being negative and the military as positive, but they're very similar situations when we regard them in terms of this idea of re-socialization. Another term that comes up quite a bit with the idea of the total institution is the idea of a degradation ceremony. A lot of times the institution, once again, in its attempt to remove your identity, replace it with one that the institution desires, sometimes we again refer to this idea of a degradation ceremony, breaking down of the individual, replacement of their identity, a lot of times through what we would consider to be kind of negative or harsh treatment. So if anybody's ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, which is a movie that came out in the 80s about a bunch of Marines preparing for going through boot camp at Parris Island in preparation for Vietnam. Again, anybody who's familiar with the movie knows exactly what I'm talking about. The boot camp scenes where the drill instructor is screaming and yelling and tearing people down, with the idea that the individual's identity is removed and replaced with the identity of a U.S. Marine. If you've ever watched documentaries or shows about prison, you'll often know that prison does exactly, attempts to do the same thing. Remove the identity of the individual who comes in and replaces it with an identity, which again, a lot of people transitioning from going to prison back into the community often report that it's very difficult for them to drop the behaviors and norms and values that they learned in prison in order to adapt and survive in those circumstances. So, once again, we can see that re-socialization is a process by which human beings continue to adapt to changes in their social environment throughout their lives.